Welcome back to HealthTech for Patients. Please continue to respond to our survey. We are getting some fantastic feedback and we're keen to hear more. And also, please, using the hashtag HTFP2, please also use the social networks to communicate around our event this afternoon. Now, let's turn to our second round table. We are going to be focusing on point-of-care technologies and putting patients first. And to lead this roundtable with our selection of international speakers, we have a notable medical oncologist, expert in hematology, orphan diseases, and rare diseases with over 25 years' experience in the pharmaceutical industry. It is a great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Alan Herrera. Alain, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alison. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, because as I understood, we have people from the different part of the world. And good afternoon to the panelists who will expose during this roundtable. So this roundtable is dedicated to point-of-care technologies for patients, as highlighted by Alison, and it will be dedicated to the transfer of existing technologies and tools to the patients. It will analyze the benefit derived from them, but also the potential issues linked to them. The first presenter, Antoni Montserrat Moliner, who will give us a keynote lecture, is the Vice President of the Luxembourg National Committee for Rare Diseases, and he was previously responsible for the policies on rare diseases and cancer at the Public Health Directorate of the European Commission. Antoni will explain the legislative framework and what is needed to optimize clinical benefit for patients, but also analyze the regulatory barrier to be overcome to harmonize the development of new innovative solutions. Then we will have two speakers explaining which tools they are putting at patient disposal and for which potential benefit. The first one will be Ayala Bliah, the CEO of SIVAN Innovation. Ayala will present MoveCare, a medical application designed for lung cancer patients and able to improve survival in this patient population. The second speaker, Benjamin Vandendriessche, CMO of Byteflies, will explain how the care-at-home platform developed by the company capture medical daily insight and make them available to providers to deliver virtual care. We will end with Uroš Bogdanović from the International Diabetes Federation, young leader in diabetes, and Uroš will testify how patients react and live in this new digital environment, what they are expecting, and with what impact on their day-to-day quality of life. So, Antoni, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alain, and thank you to the organization for this kind invitation. Okay, I have the strange task to explain a little, which is in a context as we are living in these post-pandemic times, what is happening at the level of the European Union in terms of regulatory process and others. Okay, you can imagine that maybe the years 2020 and 2021 in terms of legislation, in terms of action at the level of the European Union were times absolutely lost, times absolutely non-productive, but the reality is completely different. During all these 2 last years, we had, in terms of the health policy in the European Union, the most important changes in all the history of the European Union. Okay, it's like this. The Union probably needs a crisis for changing things. It was the case in '96, if you remember. In '96, the health policy in the European Union not exist. It was in '96 when, for the first time, a policy on health in the health area was adopted. Why? Because in '96, if you remember, we experienced for the first time a very important European crisis, the crisis of the mad cows. And it was thanks to the mad cows that the European Union discovered that something called health policy could exist at the level of the European Union. And of course, after the pandemic crisis, also the European Union discovered that not only a little budget that it was devoted to the health policy was not really productive, but that this budget needs to be multiplied practically 20 times. And that's a little the start of this new era that we are now experiencing. From one side, what is important to remember is that you should know that at the level of the European Union, it not exist policies for all the diseases. The number of diseases which are covered by actions at the level of the European Union are very limited. It's only cancer, rare diseases, Alzheimer and dementias, mental health, and under a specific legislation, infectious diseases and occupational diseases. We don't have at the European level a policy for diabetes, for cardiovascular diseases, for other diseases which could be perfectly considered as very important. Of course, the privileged field of action in terms of diseases for the European Union has been always cancer. And the policy on cancer started in '97, and in this last year, 2021, the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, one of the most important efforts in terms of health policy in the European Union, has been adopted. It's the same thing for rare diseases. The legislation is from 2008 and 2009, and now we are in a period of updating in this policy, especially thanks to the French presidency of the European Union. Okay, that's a little the situation. And we had, for more or less responding to all these diseases, a limited health program, 360 million for 7 years. But what happens? That in 2021, the Union discovered that probably that was not enough and that it's necessary to put a much more important budget, 5.1 billion, which multiplies enormously the budget dedicated to the health in the European Union. And this is something that has an impact for patients, certainly, for pharma companies, certainly, for researchers, for everyone which is a stakeholder in the field of health. Now there is a complete different period. And this is what we need to know, we need to analyze, and we need to see together how we can respond to these new times with new instruments. That's one of the things. We have now a scenario in which, as I said, we have a Europe for Health plan. We have if I can say like this, thanks to the COVID, a new, completely different approach in terms of words that were not very popular, if you want, at the level of the European Commission: early detection, screening. Now, these are magic words, used everywhere. And now everyone is discovering that really it's important to improve our capacities in the screening of cancer, in the screening, newborn screening particularly of the rare diseases, in the screening of autism, in the screening of a lot of diseases. Now, if you are really persons thinking, what can I do in terms of my maybe commercial perspective or patient's perspective, etc., think about early detection, think about newborn screening, think about the screening in general, because now this is the time for really taking into account this type of possibilities. And of course, it's also the time of the cooperation. The cooperation in terms of expanding the knowledge and facilitating that the knowledge travels. And that's the reason for which the European Union launched a very important initiative, which is the creation of the European reference networks. The European reference networks, particularly in the case of rare diseases, but not only, constitutes an opportunity unique because there are more than 900 healthcare stakeholders participating in these European reference networks. And this is a call that is repeatedly launched by the European Commission in order to expand the existing 24 European reference networks, because I insist, it is important that a hospital in Cádiz in Spain is cooperating with a hospital in Riga in Latvia, but it's not thinking in the fact that the patient should travel. What should travel is the knowledge. And that's the most important thing. We need to expand the knowledge and the share of the knowledge. And of course, there are other possibilities that are being opened. In the previous session, it was explained, and I think it's very important, the European health data space. After times of doubts, hesitations about how should we treat the data on health in the context of the general regulation of the European Union, well, the health data will have a particular approach, a particular treatment, and it's important that now also for researchers, for people really investing in health, it's important to know that this share of knowledge that will represent the European health data space is really an instrument with a powerful and extraordinary impact and capacity. And of course, we have much more things that are going later. Diagnosis. We mentioned before that it's very important, start from the beginning, from the screening, from the early detection, and go to the possibilities of seeing what we can do in terms of diagnosis. It's true that you should consider that the European Union has not all the possibilities in terms of legislation for health. I can say more or less, if I can put an example, that what happens inside the hospitals is the competence of the member states. What happens outside the hospitals could be the competence of the European Union if the member states agrees in giving this competence. And this is the situation. And of course, we need to insist in how to develop these clinical development plans. We need, for instance, in the case of rare diseases, the creation of the European Platform of Rare Diseases Registration. Is a platform located in Ispra, in Italy, in the GRC, the Joint Research Center, which is now collecting the data of the 600, approximately, rare diseases registers which exist in the European Union, and trying to establish a dialogue between these registers. And this is important. It's not only the pretension of creating a European register of rare diseases. Is a coordination of the existing registers in order that these registers dialogues facilitates the access to the people in the research, in the clinical treatment, etc., and producing an environment and possibilities for creating what is absolutely necessary to create, clinical trials. It's in the case of rare diseases, if every company should look for a necessary sample of patients for a rare disease, this is an exercise that everybody knows that is terrible for a little company in particular. Now, if you have the possibility to have this data about patients in a single registration at European level, your task will be facilitated. Your possibilities of having the necessary people for doing the clinical trial will be expanded and facilitated. And what is important is after how this data will be available. This is the task of the European health data space. There is a lot of discussions, and my colleagues in the digital equipment at the level of the European Commission have a very complicated task, but I am absolutely convinced that we will have at European level a real capacity for being a big producer of data and at the same time a big user of data, because it's not only to collect data, somebody should use the data. And probably companies knows very well the necessity of having good data for producing good technologies. And I think that finally we have a starting point which is very important. In the case, for instance, of rare diseases, I can mention in this slide, you can see that when for the first time the European Union started to talk about rare diseases, it was in 2008, 2009. And at the time, we had 4 member states having a national plan of rare diseases. Now, we have, including UK, 26 from the 28. Only 2 member states in the European Union, Sweden and Malta, don't have a national plan for rare diseases. And this is a very important success, because this type of national plans, as it exists also in the case of cancer and for other diseases, are normally integrated approach, putting together the possibilities in the field of research, in the field of epidemiology, in the field of diagnosis and clinical treatment, is very powerful instruments. And we are in France, which is the example of an extraordinary national plan on rare diseases. And it was based on the example of France that nowadays 26 of the 28, always including the UK, which is an exercise that maybe I should not do, but for purely statistical terms, I do it. And this is something that is an example. As the newborn screening should be an example. Why Uroš, which is the most important federation of patients in the field of rare diseases, insist in the newborn screening? Because what you can do at the moment of the birth will save money if you want only think on this. If our authorities think how we can reduce the impact of the rare diseases in national budgets, do the newborn screening at the first moment of the birth, in the 2 or 3 days after the birth. And you will save a lot of money, believe me, because to treat a rare disease after is much more expensive. That's the reason for which screening is so important, and the screening needs certainly to be one of the most important fields in the coming years. And okay, it was my introduction. I don't know if it's useful. I hope that at least gives to you a certain overview that in Europe things are happening, things very interesting are happening, and that the cooperation between patients, professionals, researchers, enterprises, pharma companies is much more necessary than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoni. Thank you for this very comprehensive overview on what has been done, what is ongoing at the European level. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity later on to discuss what we still have to do. So now we will move to concrete examples. And the first one will be the presentation by Ayala Bliah of MoveCare. And you will see it's, for me, extraordinary what can be done just with a very simple application. Thank you, Ayala.
Thank you, Alain, and I'm happy to be here. And, it's very interesting to hear all these voices, and I'm happy to share our experience with a concrete application. So MoveCare is the first digital therapy that is first reimbursed in France. It's a digital therapy that is based on patient-reported outcome, and that allows the doctor to monitor the patient remotely, to the patient who have patients who have cancer. It's a very easy application to use, and I will show you later. But what is very important to know, it's not just an application. I think this is the most important, is a medical device, class 1 medical device, soon class 2A medical device, meaning that we have done a lot of clinical studies. I think this is really the first point about digital therapy. We have done many years, 7 years of clinical studies in order to prove the benefit of MoveCare for the patients. The innovation here was to do clinical studies the same as for a drug. So we had 2 arms, one control arm, one experimental arm, and then we followed the patient with MoveCare, and we were able to demonstrate that patients who were followed with MoveCare had 7.6 months improvement in overall survival. For patients with lung cancer, it's a lot. It's 26% of improvement, and they also had improvement in quality of life. So we had publication in the JAMA, in the GNCI. We went twice to ASCO to present our results, and therefore we were able to secure the reimbursement in 2020. Today, MoveCare is being used in 70 centers in France, prescribed by 135 physicians, and we hope to have a lot more patients using it going forward. So how does it work? It's very simple. The first step is the prescription by the doctor. The doctor needs to prescribe MoveCare, the same as for a drug. It's a paper prescription. Once the patient receives the prescription, we start sending, as you can see here, a weekly questionnaire to the patient. It's questions that are based on symptoms. So, for example, do you feel weak, breathlessness, cough, all these symptoms. And the power of MoveCare is the algorithm that analyzes the combination of these symptoms, not only on the time t, but really on a dynamic point of view. And if the algorithm detects an anomaly, a complication, anything, therefore the system will send an alert to the doctor. We proved that the tool has a very high specificity, a very high sensitivity, meaning that if there is a problem, there is an alert. If there is no problem, there is no alert. Because if you disturb the doctor every 2 minutes, it's not going to work. So it's very important that the tool really send an alert only if it's needed. The question that it's often asked, and maybe now we understand a bit more, but before patient-reported outcome, such a tool was really totally new. It's how such a tool can improve survival. And by 7.6 months, which is significant, the reality is that a patient who has cancer is only going to see his oncologist every 3 months or every 6 months, depending if you are under treatment or under surveillance. And everything that happens between the visit, between the scanner, often gets undetected. The patient just thinks, maybe it's not related to the cancer, I don't want to bother the doctor. So he's just going to wait until the next visit to talk about his symptom to the doctor. And when he does, unfortunately, it's very often too late to give him an optimal treatment. So by following closely the evolution of the symptom of the patient, we are able to detect on time the relapse or the complication, and therefore to treat earlier the patient and to give him the right treatment at the right time. For the patient, the benefit is really obvious, overall survival improvement, but above the overall survival is also a question of quality of life. You have patient who is very often sick and alone with his sickness, and it's unless you are a VIP patient and you have a direct line with the doctor, yes, usually you just have to wait until the visit to talk to the doctor. And this tool really gives the patient the impression to be closer from the doctor, to have a personalized follow-up. Somebody is looking out for me, somebody is really following me. And I think that what's important also from what I heard before is the fact that we created the tool together with the patients. And therefore, the tool is very easy to use, and the patient, for them, in fact, you will see testimonials. They tell us, I'm waiting for the Monday to fill out my questionnaire because this day I feel that I'm really closer from the doctor. So I just want to say that very often, unfortunately, we wait until it's too late to do something. We wait until the patient's health state is so deteriorated that it's too late to act. And the goal for me of MoveCare and digital therapy is really not to wait and to go to the patient in order to be really proactive and to have the good reaction on the right time. Also, like we discussed a lot about the lack of equality of the access of treatment for all patients. Patients live very far away from the hospital sometimes, Also during the COVID, we realized that the patients who have cancer, they are fragile, they are scared to go to the hospital, they are going to catch maybe some infection. And such a tool really is a way to give a quality to access to everyone. So the patient is at the heart of our product. You have here numbers, you can see numbers that speak for themselves. You have 98% of the patients who really find the application intuitive, easy. 8 patients on 10 that really feel that the application reassures them regarding their medical care. I think that I heard before that the compliance of the patient is low, but here with MoveCare we have a proof that if it's the right application, it can be actually very high. We have 95% of compliance in real life from the patient to MoveCare. Here you can just see, and I will finish with that, some patients who really say that it reassures them, it's very reassuring, I'm waiting for the Monday. So we are really working for this testimonial of the patient. We know that this tool is great for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayala. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. It seems that, in fact, we are here close to the field of, with targeted therapy, we speak about companion diagnostic. And really, this approach is a companion of the treatment. And it's really a way of optimizing the treatment, and considering that you choose as an example non-small cell lung cancer. 10 years ago, there was no alternative treatment to patients relapsing after frontline therapy. Today, it's not anymore the case. We have targeted therapies, we have immune checkpoint inhibitors, we have a lot, and it's important to allow the patient to access this effective treatment as soon as possible, as you say, because you cannot wait weeks or even months before your relapse will be detected. If it's early detection, it will be much more efficient. So we will move to another also very interesting example in a different field, different approach, but it's also very important to hear about your care at home platform.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with all these like-minded people. So I'm going to be talking about Byteflies and specifically our care at home platform. And so to just start off with maybe a little bit of context, and I think it's going to echo quite a few things that were maybe already said in the first panel earlier today, is that currently there's some major challenges in healthcare. A big one being that more than 50% of people worldwide nowadays have at least one chronic condition. So and on top of that, these chronic conditions are associated with a loss of disability-adjusted life years, with the years lived without disability are actually stagnating, especially for rare diseases, but other complex chronic conditions too. The time to diagnose can be very long, and the costs for all of this are exploding worldwide. So if you look at the healthcare landscape, and again, if we're talking about those challenges, then you see that in a lot of cases, the new drug discoveries, new targets are identified on a frequent basis still, and a lot of new innovative medicines are coming on the market. However, when we're talking about the delivery of that care, that's where that's where we can really still make major improvements. If you look at, for instance, point-of-care technology, and then we're talking about the more traditional version of point-of-care technologies that are hospital or clinic-based, they are typically spot checks. Usually they're fairly accurate, but they are expensive. They require specialized personnel to operate them. They have a lot of operational overhead. On the other hand, you have, on the right side of the slide, things like self-reporting. And like we just heard from MoveCare, if applied well, it can be very, very powerful. But the general consensus right now is still that self-reporting is fairly subjective in nature, whether it's through self-reported outcomes or through medical history. And the adherence can be low when the tools are not fit for purpose. So what we're looking at is, what we see at Byteflies is a major opportunity to fill that problem or to fix that problem of delivery of care. But it requires a paradigm shift. If you go back a couple of decades, then a lot of the healthcare facilities were becoming better and better at providing care, but they were very fragmented. They were isolated from each other. Then more recently, there has been kind of a phase where there's been more and more centralization in the sense that centers of excellence were created, networks of providers were created to care for specific, more complex diseases. Nowadays, and we're really talking about like a very frequent change, very much boosted by COVID care, we're more and more talking about virtual care, where the idea is that the care goes where the patient is. Now, of course, that's not always possible. For some specialized interventions, you will still need to go to a specialized facility, but more and more we're trying to organize the care and the care paths around where the patient is, bring the care to them to make it more effective. And so that's where our Care at Home platform comes in. So what is it? It's a end-to-end remote patient monitoring service. And it consists of a couple of steps. They're outlined on the slide on the bottom. So a provider will prescribe care at home, and there's more than one care at home. I'll come back to that on the next slide. We take care of the logistics to make sure that if wearable devices are needed, and we develop these wearable devices with medical certification ourselves. So we make sure that those medical devices get shipped to the right location, to the patient directly or through their provider. Patient starts monitoring with the solution, data comes in, we crunch the numbers and upload reports to the provider. Typically, those reports are uploaded on a daily basis, so that also means that the monitoring, the length of monitoring can be dynamically adjusted. So it's not because the provider says, hey, we should be monitoring this person for 2 weeks, but maybe after 3 days they already pick up what they've been looking for. They can actually stop based on the results generated so far. So why do we call it a platform? Because it really consists of a number of systems that work together. So we have what we call plug and patch. So these devices that we build, they're more advanced, or they at least record more advanced signals than what you can typically record on your wrist. So they need adhesives with flexible electronics incorporated in them to connect them to your body. So we have collaborations with various world leaders and industry partners on medical adhesives, flexible electronics, to very quickly put out new designs based on the patient populations that we want to cover. Next to that, we have SensorDot. That's really at the core of the platform. That's kind of our main wearable device, and all of the things that you need to make sure that the data gets uploaded to our cloud so that we can crunch the numbers. And then we get to Care at Home. And as you can see here, and I mentioned it previously on the slide before, there's not a single Care at Home. We have multiple versions that are optimized for specific groups of people. The way we do that is we have a couple of components that we will typically optimize for a specific disease indication. So for instance, the dashboard that the healthcare professional uses, the analytics that we run will be optimized. The patient app can be tailor-made towards their specific needs. And then we have the logistics and the reports that we generate that kind of tie all of this together. So to give you a couple of examples of 3 of these Care at Home applications that are currently actually active in the field, primarily in Belgium where we're headquartered. One of them is COVID Care at Home. So as the name implies, this is for people that have stable or non-severe COVID. They either end up in the emergency department because they have symptoms, but they're not severe enough to be admitted. They were hospitalized, but their symptoms have improved. They're in an assisted care facility. They were forwarded by a GP and so forth. In any case, they flow to COVID Care at Home, where they get sent home for up to 7 days with this system. And the important part is that the Care at Home application kind of integrates all these different care providers that are interacting with the patients, the hospital, the specialist, the GP, and a telemonitoring team. And so outcomes that are possible from COVID Care at Home are either full discharge when vital signs are still stable after 7 days, or when they deteriorate, a readmission. So this system has been used to monitor more than 1,200 patients in Belgium. 30 hospitals have been using it for more than a year now. It has resulted in reduced length of stay, up to 2 days per patient, and very similar to what we heard before about move care, especially from elderly people. We consistently hear that the knowledge that that somebody's watching over them in this kind of scary period is really something that improves their quality of life. And so this application is currently reimbursed based on temporary emergency COVID-19 related codes in Belgium. Another application that we have is CardioCare at home. So here we're going to be screening for atrial fibrillation specifically after people had a cryptogenic stroke, meaning a stroke where the underlying cause is unknown, or had a clinical TIA. So they go home, they're still in the hospital depending on their situation, for up to 4 weeks with a solution that will continuously screen for the presence of atrial fibrillation. Again, similar concept. Specialists and first-line providers are all kind of connected through this platform directly to the patient. After the monitoring period, depending on the data that's been collected, either AFib will be diagnosed and a treatment plan can be started, or they will move to ultra long-term monitoring, for instance, with an implantable loop recorder if that's indicated. So one of the things that we've seen is that, particularly in Belgium, there can be very long wait times after somebody suffered a stroke to get to appropriate monitoring if they're waiting for a more traditional Holter type setup or an implantable loop recorder. So with CardioCare at home, we're trying to reduce those wait times and actually have no wait times at all anymore, which not only ensures that we could potentially detect AFib sooner and potentially prevent a secondary stroke, but also that the anxiety during this period is reduced in the patients. Next to that, of course, from a more, let's say, high-level point of view, this whole platform acts as a data integrator. We've heard a lot about that from previous speakers. It also integrates the caregivers that are working with the patient, and of course all of our data is based on medical devices, so we're really following an evidence-based approach, and these are kind of the components that you need to get to the to start putting value-based principle into practice. A final application that we have is Epicure at home. So this is focused on people with epilepsy who have a need for seizure counting. So it can be because their seizures are uncontrolled, they self-reported seizures, they underwent a treatment change, and there's a need to keep a closer eye on them. Then they can go home, again, 1 week up to 4 weeks on average. Here we're really looking at pretty advanced signals, including EEG that is being recorded in the home with a wearable device. Similar principle, outcomes in this case of the care path can be various things. It can lead to a change in treatment, it can lead to a decision to go through ultra long-term monitoring, and so forth. So also here, because especially the use of this system compared to going to a hospital and being hooked up to a full EEG setup with a video camera on your face in terms of quality of life is very different. And of course, that's, let's say, an added benefit on top of all the diagnostic data that you're collecting in the real world. And all of the things that I was mentioning with CardioCare at home that apply from a, let's say, value-based care perspective, of course, apply in this case as well. So my coordinates are on this slide. If anybody in the audience wants to reach out and has any questions, feel free to reach out directly, but you can also put them in the system so that we can discuss them during the panel.
Thank you, Ben. We saw through your presentation that digitalization can be really part of precision medicine and even personalized medicine. It's really tailored for specific, not only specific diseases, but also specific type of patients.
Exactly, yes.
So it's really personalized medicine. So now we will have the testimony of a patient, Uroš, and Uroš will tell us how patients with chronic diseases can live and live better in this new environment of digital health. Please, Uroš.
Thank you, Alan. It's really a pleasure to be here among you. This is HealthTech For Patients, nonetheless. So I'm glad to be a representative of the patients here on this panel and this event. So yeah, living with type 1 diabetes for more than 12 years, I've had a lot of experience with health tech, and in these modern times, I think diabetes is one of the chronic conditions that has so many things going on in terms of health tech, mostly with insulin delivery. So insulin, the drug you need to survive, using insulin pumps, smart pens. So there are many different devices. Also glucose monitoring, the continuous glucose monitoring using different types of sensors, as well as applications that combine all that data, that share that data with your healthcare provider. So there is a lot of things going on. So I think I have the opportunity to share what we do like and what we don't. So in the following few minutes, I'll try to do just that. So essentially, I think the majority of patients living with diabetes actually love these new technologies because it improves their quality of life. It relieves the burden from the patient of living with that chronic condition 24/7. We have no vacations from our conditions, so it's a real benefit to have something taken away from you, just one thing to worry about during the day less. However, there are some big issues with in this area. I'm not going to focus too much on access to these technologies because I believe we'll be talking about it during the discussion. So provided that we do have access to this technology, what are the issues? I think the most important thing and the biggest issue is the lack of education and communication between the stakeholders. I've put out 3 stakeholders here. Obviously, the list is longer, but I think these 3 stakeholders are key in this area, which I find problematic. So what happens? A new product comes on the market, provided we have access to it. Healthcare providers, I think, healthcare professionals, I think they are the first ones to get familiarized with it. They communicate with the pharmaceutical companies on an expert level. They have conferences, they have meetings, so they are aware of the new technologies. And the tech provider needs to share the knowledge, share the information on that new device, so what it can and cannot do. But then it is important that the healthcare professionals and the tech provider both refer that information to the patient, because in the end it is up to the patient with its healthcare professional to decide which treatment, which device, what is optimal for that particular patient. And that is what Ben, you mentioned, the personalized care, the tailored care. I think that is definitely the future. But what happens, it's not accidental that I've put these 3 stakeholders in this particular pattern, because it shouldn't be like this. I think the knowledge of the patients is very often underestimated, because in the end we are the ones living with the condition. Without offense to healthcare professionals, you studied it, but we live it. So I think it's very important to treat patients as equal partners, so to remove this barrier between the ladder approach. Patients need to be treated equally, and Antoni mentioned in the beginning, the sharing of knowledge. I think there is a lot of things that both the tech providers, the healthcare professionals, and all other stakeholders can learn from the patients themselves. And I would just like to share, some information, like an example of what happens if that communication is not on a very good level. So I've taken these 2 sentences from the manuals of 2 devices that are very commonly used, with people with diabetes. They are glucose monitors. used by, I believe, millions of people living with diabetes around the world. So it's essentially, it says that there are some substances, some not so uncommon ones, so mostly paracetamol and vitamin C, for instance, that can have that can have an effect to falsely raise the readings of the glucose monitor and to show actually higher glucose levels than they actually are. These devices have been on the market for years now, and I've only noticed it quite recently. One of the diabetes bloggers that I follow on social media posted a story and said, did you guys know that this device is affected by the levels of vitamin C in your body? And I think no one knew. Putting my legal hat on because I'm an attorney, I'm not saying that anyone withheld any information. I mean, these sentences are still from the manual. But I think, there was a misunderstanding, of the target of the patient, because I guess the tech providers did not think, this information was too important, so they put it on page 27 of the manual, without actually telling the patients something that they might find very important. And I think this information was very important 2 years ago, because, as I said, these devices are on the market for years. And then in 2020, COVID struck. I think the number of people that started or increased, taking vitamin C supplements or, taking paracetamol as, a drug to treat active COVID patients, the numbers were huge. And then you had the situation where a device that you essentially trust your life with, and you have done so for years before, actually fails you. I mean, it does not fail, but it can give you false information which can lead to some certain consequences, in relation to diabetes. And if you're sick, you want your blood glucose to be in range as much as possible, and you want accurate data. So, and when I actually Googled, this information, this statement, a lot of clinical studies arose, there were a lot of results on clinical studies actually studying this particular influence of these substances. Which means, going back to the previous slide, the tech providers and the healthcare professionals are aware of this, because the scientists and the companies work together to discover why this is and to obviously overcome these issues. But the patients had no idea. I mean, I've talked to, I think, more than 20 people with diabetes around me who use these devices. No one knew that there are some substances that can affect. So I think that is something that we need to be looking forward to improve. As I said, hearing the patient's voice, because in the beginning, the tech providers and the healthcare professionals know more about the disease, the new product, the new technology, but give a patient a few years living with the condition, using the specific technology, I think they surpass the other stakeholders with their knowledge because they have personal experiences. So if we used that patient knowledge from the beginning, from the inception phase of a certain new product, of certain new technologies, just asking a patient what they actually need to help take that burden of the condition off the patient itself, I think we will do a lot. So in the end, having patients as equal partners in that in the healthcare systems, patients as individuals, but most importantly, patient associations as organizations that can crunch all that information, from various people, various patients living with that certain condition, and refer all that information to the other stakeholders. If we, can improve on that, I think, we can definitely improve the lives of patients, which I believe is our common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Uroš. Thank you for this very detailed discussion already. Not discussion, but presentation of really what patients are expecting. So now we will move to the general discussion, and waiting the question from the audience, I would like to start with you. And if I was summarizing all your presentation with one word, I will take a word used by Uroš, which is access. Access is key, definitively. And I would like you to elaborate, based on your experience, your involvement in the different components, what for you has to be done, has to be improved in terms of access. And access is not just, when we speak about access, we think about market access. No, it's not just market access. It's access to all the components, including information, proper information, right, accurate information, but there are a lot of different components through the idea of access. So, Antoni, please, can you start? We always start with the legislative and regulatory component when we are speaking about health, treatment, and so on.
No, I agree with you that access is a magical word because we need access to care, access to cure, access to medication, access to treatment. First of all, and Uroš has very well explained it, access to information. That's essential. And at this moment, well, I think things are improving, probably because there is a special agent very active at the level of the European Union, which are the patient associations. That's very important. I explained it at the beginning. We have a very important policy at the European level in the field of rare diseases. Okay, thanks to Uroš. We have a very important policy in the field of care. Okay, thanks to the European Coalition of Patients of Cancer, which is a very powerful association. We have a very good policy, more or less, in the field of Alzheimer and dementia, thanks to Alzheimer Europe. Then, I mean, when there is a real pressure, professional pressure, very well organized lobbying from the side of the patient associations, the access is always easiest. And of course, the role of the International Diabetes Federation is also very, very important in this field. Autism Europe, okay, there are a lot of different associations. Without this associative world from the patients, the access will be much more complicated. And I think that is the two things that we will put together. We need better access, and we need better, I will not say better patients, but we need better organized patients that are able to do the necessary lobbying, the necessary pressure in order to have a very good access to cure, to care, to treatment, to medication, and to information.
Uroš, can you not answer to Antoni, but maybe develop what he just said about patient involvement?
Of course, to develop further, I think again, in terms of access, there is a lot, to the patients as well. A lot of things that patients through patient organizations can do. Again, usually, again speaking from the perspective of diabetes, there's a whole lot of us. People living with diabetes. The prevalence is around 10% in most European countries, or even higher. So 10% of people of Europe have diabetes. Most of them actually don't know they have diabetes, which is an issue, but let's not go into there. But they possess this moving force, and if patient organizations can handle that force and can instruct it in a very precise way, I think it can be the overpowering energy to actually get that access. Access to care is essential because access obviously to new health technologies will actually improve our lives. So we are all rooting for that and working on that. But it is difficult, and that is why we need to through these panels, through different participation at conferences, etc., and through communications with other stakeholders. Obviously, no one is just going to invite us and give us our space. We need to push for it. But if we can fight it out with all other stakeholders, if we can actually make ourselves equal with them, I think there's a lot we can do in terms of access.
Okay. Ayala and Ben, both of you mentioned during your presentation, Ayala, the reimbursement of MoveCare in France, but in France only. Ben, you mentioned the reimbursement of your platform dedicated to COVID in Belgium. So why we do not have in this field larger access, more harmonization between the different European countries? Can you answer?
Well, first, I think that there is a lack. That we have the MDR, for example, so there is harmonization in the regulation, which is great, but there is no harmonization in the way how to access the market. So in Germany, for example, you have the DIGA. In France, you have now the telesurveillance law. Each country is working very independently, and I do believe that they should work together. They should put in place something like much more harmonious, so that the industrial doesn't have to go for reimbursement in France and then go to Germany and then go to Belgium. I think that it's just something that needs to be done by the authorities. When you talk about access, there is something that is very important, is the clinical studies. This is the only reason we got the reimbursement. We have proof. It's a medical device, it's for the good of the patient. We don't want to give just an application, and we don't know if there is a benefit for the patient and if there is a benefit for the organization. But clinical studies takes a long time and it costs a lot of money. So it's good to request such proof to get the CE mark and to get reimbursed. But I do believe that also here, the authorities, they need to accompany the industrial in order to be able to get the proof. Otherwise, it will be very difficult, I think, to scale.
Ben?
Yeah, I can definitely try to add on to what you were just saying. So you mentioned the DIGA, the German legislation, the French legislation. I can maybe comment quickly on what's happening in Belgium. So in Belgium, we have the concept of what's called mHealth Belgium, and more specifically, they have the mHealth pyramid. And so the mHealth pyramid consists of 3 layers, and it really, it's a broad base, and then it goes up. And the lowest level is CE certification. So there is a requirement that anything that labels itself as a mobile health technology, remote patient monitoring solution, whatever, needs to be CE certified medical device. The second layer is an interesting one. There's no clear guidance around it yet, but it has to do with being interoperable with the e-health landscape in Belgium in this case. The fact that it's focused on Belgium is another problem that we're discussing here because it's very localized, but nevertheless they are trying on the country level to make sure that there is a requirement that you need to be interoperable. Now the third level is reimbursement. And as you were just saying, that requires that your evidence requirements are met. And so the interesting thing that they're doing now, this is this is a very recent change, a couple of weeks ago, is that they're splitting the M3 level, it's called, the highest level, the reimbursement level, into two sub-steps. The lowest level of M3, of the third level, is temporary reimbursement. In other words, if you can make a good case based on literature, based on some level of information that's already available in the field, that this might be useful, you might be able to get temporary reimbursement to already start collecting data in the field within a certain time period before you get, hopefully, permanent reimbursement. So that's then the second level, is the permanent reimbursement. And they're really trying to map this on different care paths as opposed to the technology. So technology is no longer the driver, the care path that you're trying to cover and the potential value you can create is the driver. So if a competitor comes in with a similar solution, they may not need to go through all the clinical trials and all collecting all the medical evidence if it is similar enough. Now, those guidelines are still very much under development. So what that means, similar enough, is not necessarily clear. But this is just Belgium. And this is a different system from what we're seeing in Germany, from what we're seeing in France. There's some overlap, but definitely a lot of differences too. Coming back to the point that there's a lot of fragmentation in Europe, which is, if we can figure out a way to move away from that, we can definitely be much more competitive in Europe compared to the rest of the world than we are now.
We have a question from the audience, which is in fact a sort of prolongation of what you just said. So the question is, can the developed wearables in Belgium be scaled up in other lands, context, or do they have to be customized for each patient context? Do you have cost effectiveness data?
So that's a very good question. And so we think, and we really firmly believe, that it is incredibly important to make sure that you develop towards an application that is really tailor-made to that specific group of patients. Because otherwise, as you said, with MoveCare, you'll have low adherence, you'll have low compliance, it will simply not work, and it will not generate the data that allows a physician to use it for his or her decision-making. In other words, it's a dead solution, it will not be used, right? So we strongly believe in that customization, but you have to draw a line because you can't certify every single bit and component. That's why the platform approach is so important, because we certify these individual components individually, but then we can reuse them for other types of applications depending on how we put, let's say, the box of Legos back together to cover another application.
And I have also a question for Ayala. The question is, does MoveCare increases the workload of doctor?
It's a very good question.
It's an easy question to answer.
Also, it's a question that goes back also to the access, because once you get the reimbursement, you also need to be used by the doctor. And it's true that doctors are very often scared that it will increase their workload. The answer is not simple. It's not exactly that it will increase the workload, it is that it will impact completely the organization. So we realized over time that, for example, a nurse is very important in the process. If you have an hospital with a nurse, a coordinating nurse, for example, that can do a pre-triage of the alerts, it will be perfect for the doctor. If not, so it can be a bit more difficult, and it will increase the workload of the doctor, at least initially. What we did at SIVAN, yes, we have a nurse that belongs to SIVAN, in order to help the doctor, in order to do this work of pre-triage of the alerts. But we do hope that with the new law that was issued in France, it will be financed by the French authorities. So.
And there was, from the same person, a second question, but I think you answered. Can the doctor still provide care to the same number of patients?
Of
same
course.
number, or less, or more?
No, for the same number, because the way it will do, it will reallocate the work of the doctor also. So at the end of the day, he will be able to provide the same care to all his patients. Also, something I want to say to the doctors, because it's very important, is that it actually saves them time during the medical visit. This is super important, because they have the complete view of all the evolution of the symptoms of the patient. So the doctor, they need like to spend less time on the technical aspect of the visit and more time on the human aspect of the visit. So this is essential, I think.
Yeah, and I think we can even say this can allow the doctor to follow and to have a better follow-up of more patients. Because even if we may consider that you can spend more time at the beginning explaining and so on, thereafter you will save time, and you will save time. Today, we spoke about non-small cell lung cancer, but Move Care can also be used in, let's say, really chronic diseases. Mm-hmm. And it will be follow-up for months, years. So,
I agree. Once the doctor will be educated, he will know how it works, eventually it can save him time on the longer run.
Yeah, we see very similar things, that if you engage the healthcare professionals as early as possible in the process and try to get them on board, that it has a dramatic positive effect on the way the application is used. And the same for the patients, by the way, as to your point.
Exactly, and that is the thing. If you have different inputs, different perspectives, and we all do have different perspectives, I think it can only make the product better.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. What is the best way to receive the patient's perspective for pharmaceutical companies? So it's primarily for you, but it's also a question for Ayala and Ben.
Well, knowing that there are certain restrictions in, pharmaceutical companies communicating directly to patients. Obviously, the legislation is quite strict there. But I think you should, the patient organizations, as they're not individual patients, they represent the patients. And I don't know, for instance, in Serbia, the Diabetes Association of Serbia has good relationships with pharmaceutical companies in the country. We try to have a good relationship with the government, with the universal healthcare provider. So, in that way, if you have a good relationship, you can be recognized as a partner, and you can actually advocate for the stance of the patient and present their perspective to the table. And what we always like to say, that spending money in treating patients and improving their quality of life is not actually spending money; it's investing. Rather than spending or losing money in, them having a worse quality of life or even dying, or it's not spending money; it's investing.
So before closing this roundtable, because we do not have much time, I would like you just to deliver very briefly one message. Who would like to start? Considering that we will end with Uroš, because this roundtable was dedicated to patient, so the patient has to have the last word. So who would like to start? Ayala?
Okay, I think that what's important is to say that digital therapy, the technology, it's the future of the medicine. It will not replace the drug. It does not replace the doctor, of course, but it will become more and more essential. I believe that the patients today are more and more willing to participate to their follow-up. They want to be active. I don't believe they want to be passive. I really believe that they want to be active, to be an active part, a stakeholder in their follow-up. And I think that the digital therapy, they really help them do that and be more engaged in their follow-up.
Ben, a brief conclusion from you?
Sure. So, and kind of maybe to extend on that, because fully agreed with what you just said, and I would add, it takes a village, right? It won't be like if you look at what we're doing at Byteflies. This platform is just a tiny piece of the puzzle to make care more engaging, to make it more accurate, to make it more personalized, to make it more precise, and it will require a very large group of stakeholders to all rally around the same cause. And the fact that the European Union is looking into this, the fact that in the US various efforts are underway to look into that is encouraging, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Antoni, what's your message?
No, I think looking at the performances today in this roundtable, which are extraordinary, really, well, it's positive, constructive, and optimistic, because really it's important that people like you are doing the extraordinary efforts that you are doing and creating things really useful for the patients. I think that it's also very positive that at the level of the European Union, things are changing in the mind in the sense of the importance of concepts as early detection, screening, ignored in the past. It's also important that in the new revision of the pharma legislation, one of the main points is to align the decisions of the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, with the decisions of the FDA, the Food and Drugs Associations in the United States, to avoid the stupid situations when an approval here and not approval there. And I think that really, well, finally we can say maybe we should thank the COVID-20 because the COVID has changed things, and sometimes, well, we can say it's changing in a positive way, and we should extract lessons that are positive for everybody.
Uroš, the last word?
Health tech indeed does change the lives of patients, usually for the better. I think we've heard, from the perspective of Move Care that simpler is usually better, and that is the case. If you have health tech which takes off the burden of the condition, but you get another burden of actually using, and we avoid, as patients, we avoid using the word being compliant, but actually using that technology and making yourself do it every day. I think if you get to that part, it becomes more difficult, so you're not going to get the same results. So you want to say? So I think we need to work together on better, simpler solutions which are accessible to the most people as possible, and I think by that we will actually help the patients, which I hope is our common goal.
Thank you, Uroš. Thank you all, and thank you for the people who followed us until the end of this roundtable. Alison, I'm sorry.
Perfect timing, absolutely perfect. Thank you so much to Antoni, Alain, Ben, Uroš, and thank you, Alan, for your moderation of this truly inspiring. It's really our warm thanks to you all. In a few minutes, we will be bringing our afternoon event to a close. Before that, we will be sending out the second survey, and we would ask you to take a couple of moments to fill it in, because we really are looking forward to getting your feedback following this inspiring and rich discussion. So, stay with us. In a few moments, we will be concluding. See you then.